Videos that reportedly show shelling, bombs, explosions, and conflict all erupting in eastern Ukraine. It's hard to know exactly what's happening because the U.S. wants war. But perhaps so does Russia. And everybody's got their opinion. The mainstream press in the United States says that Russia is pushing the line. The Biden administration has made it clear we will not allow this. But critics, activists, the anti-war left and right are pointing out none of this seems to make sense. Why would Russia attack now, of all times? I mean, during the Trump administration, seemingly nothing was happening. During the Obama administration, it was the apocalypse. And then you get a lull. It does sound kind of like maybe it is the Democratic establishment that's pushing for war with Russia and trying to gain control of Ukraine to bring it into NATO. It's hard to know for sure, to be completely honest, and there is a good reason to believe that Vladimir Putin is making moves to invade Ukraine now. It makes sense. Donald Trump, for better or for worse, he was a madman. I mean, some people say he's a madman in a positive sense. Some people say he was a madman in a very negative sense, but Vladimir Putin felt it whichever way you spin it. Donald Trump would not have allowed Afghanistan to have occurred. It would have been scorched earth. Donald Trump would not allow what's happening in Ukraine to occur under his watch. He would not be that president. So perhaps it does make sense. Vladimir Putin knows now is his only chance. He needs to gain control of Ukraine. And he can do so by invading in the east and making his way to Kiev. And it's possible. This is part of the Russian agenda. But I gotta be honest. I don't know if I completely believe the narrative coming out of the Biden administration. It doesn't make sense to me that Russia would try to invade from the east to make its way to Kiev. It makes more sense if they wanted Ukraine, they'd go and take Ukraine. But the reality there is they took Crimea, and not a whole lot was done under the Obama administration. Putin may be hoping he can seize more territory from Ukraine. And the latest news suggests we could be on the verge of very serious conflict. And worst case scenario, I'm going to say it, World War III. Now, I don't like to play that game, World War III, everybody scream, because I think a lot of outlets are pushing this simply because it's going to get clicks. It's the shock title. But then I start doing all this research and all these articles pop up constantly screaming World War III. And maybe the reality is it's not just shock content. Maybe there really is a strong possibility of a World War III. Maybe we're actually in it. If Russia makes a move for Luhansk and Donetsk, China, seeing the opportunity from a distracted West, could move into Taiwan, and then it's just balls to the walls from there. North Korea goes nuts, Iran goes nuts, everyone sees an opportunity in the chaos, and then you get a World War III. The latest news is that Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin, they're going to recognize separatist republics in Ukraine. It's kind of an absurd statement because the separatist groups in eastern Ukraine don't actually have all that much control of these regions, and they're not all that expansive. But it matters because they want military assistance from Russia. Russia could be playing this game so they could say, well, we recognize the independence. People have a right to self-governance. What's that? You want our troops? Well, don't look at us. It's the independent Republic of Luhansk that wants Russian troops to enter this territory. We're not invading Ukraine. We're sending military assistance to an independent nation. Do you think the West will stand by and allow that to happen? The answer is no. Do you think Joe Biden has the wherewithal, the capacity to defend a Ukraine from a Russian invasion? The answer is no. And knowing that, as much as I don't believe the Biden administration, I think there's a really good reason Putin wants to make this move, and it could be disastrous for the world. It's a reckless game, man. But you know that the U.S., man, they've wanted Ukraine for a while now. There's a lot to do with natural gas, energy prices. It has a lot to do with Joe Biden and Burisma. And maybe all of this is just an opportunity for Biden to cover up whatever dirty games he was playing with the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, where his son was on the board of directors. But let's read through the news, talk about the latest conflict, what it means for Putin to recognize the Eastern quote-unquote republics, and why people are now screaming World War III. And I'm going to say it right off the bat. The first and most obvious reason they're screaming it, because you're going to click on it. Let's just be honest about that. And then I struggle with whether or not I want to include World War III in the title of this video for that exact reason, but I need to actually answer all of these articles with these questions. It's tough the way the media plays these games, to be completely honest. And full disclosure, I know full well World War III gets clicks. But maybe there's something to this. Maybe it's just my distrust of the media why I would think it's not a legitimate question. Maybe there really is a question about a World War III or some great conflict because of what's happening here. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to help support all of our work. We have a team of journalists. I think we might have like 10 or so. I'm not entirely sure, but we have a big team, around 30 or so plus people here. All of these jobs are possible because you guys are members at timcast.com. As a member, you'll get access to our exclusive members-only shows like The Green Room with our guests from Timcast IRL, hanging out, talking candidly off the show. We also have the Timcast IRL podcast members-only segments Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. But the most important thing is all of our journalists are employed because you guys are members. We do have some ads, we do have some sponsors, but we rely on individuals supporting us. It's the safest way to do it. It's the most powerful way to support us, and we're greatly appreciative if you do. So go to timcast.com, sign up, but don't forget to smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel, share this video wherever you can. Let's read the news. Axios reports Putin to recognize separatist republics in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has told his German and French counterparts that he intends to soon sign a decree recognizing 2 breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine as independent. The Kremlin announced on Monday. Putin is expected to give a televised address imminently. Why it matters. The separatists don't hold all of the territory they claim and have asked for Russian military assistance. Recognition could thus be a de facto declaration of war from Putin. But you need to understand, too, sidestep, real quick, 4th and 5th generational warfare. And what we're seeing right now is exactly that. Warfare used to be relatively straightforward in an era where media wasn't so readily available. Communications were harder to come by, slower, as it were. War could simply be, they got in a tank, they marched those tanks up the lines, they fired shells, they took the territory and said, it's ours now. With 4th generational warfare, you get proxy wars, insurgent groups leading the charge in certain countries, where the U.S. can be like, don't look at us, it's a local rebel faction. Just so happens they support them. And 5th generational warfare, of course, psychological manipulation and propaganda. What we're seeing now could very well be 4th and 5th generational warfare. The 4th generational warfare scenario here is that these separatist groups are actually just Russian proxies. And Russia feigns ignorance, saying, well, we just support the independence of these groups. And the 5th generational warfare here is the intelligence and propagandistic efforts on top of that. Well, it's an independence movement, and we recognize them. And then they sow distrust, mistrust. They make it very difficult for you to understand what's going on. So the only thing you can do is say, well, I guess I trust the government. My friends, if you trust the government, you have not been paying attention to history. And that being said, it's a very difficult position to be in. I trust the U.S. more than I trust Russia, to be completely honest. I think Vladimir Putin has got his eye on expansion and some kind of pseudo-Soviet Union reemergence, the Russian trade union or something of that effect. But man, I certainly don't trust Joe Biden. So I'll put it this way, on a scale of 1 to 10 in trust, Joe Biden gets a 2 and Vladimir Putin gets a 1. It's not saying much, to be completely honest. They go on to say, the separatists declared independence in 2014 and have waged a low-scale war against Ukrainian forces since then, with military backing from Moscow. The fighting has escalated since Thursday, with Kiev accusing the separatists of persistent shelling across the line of contact. Analysts expect Russian recognition of the separatist republics to be followed by deployment of peacekeeper forces. But it's unclear whether they would seek to secure the territory the separatists currently hold or the entirety of the areas they claim. See the map. At a time when the White House continues to warn of an imminent large-scale invasion, Putin's latest moves could be interpreted as a sign that his immediate military focus is on the eastern Donbass region and not on the capital of Kiev. And that's exactly what I was saying in the beginning. This idea that they're putting out that Russia's going to take Kiev and then go after supporters of Zelensky, the president, things like that, that sounds absurd to me. What we can see is that Russia is making a very slow and controlled move. And I would imagine what they really want is to control the areas north of Crimea, which means their expansion here, it certainly won't stop. Russia does not want Ukraine in NATO because it would put Western forces at their doorstep. Now, one of the most important issues is access to the Black Sea, which is why it is believed Russia annexed Crimea or conquered it, whatever you want to claim. They brought in their troops back in 2014. They said, oh, there was a vote and they all decided to join Russia. But as you can see here, Axios's map still shows Ukraine. It still shows Crimea as a part of Ukraine, though there is a dotted line there because Russia currently occupies and controls it. I believe it's very obvious Russia will do the same thing. They are slow rolling this. They know Joe Biden is weak. They know he can't handle it. Now, where does this all lead to? I mean, surely if Putin takes these eastern regions, why should Americans care? To be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure we should care. Of course, there's Western interests. There's the interests of our allies and Eastern Europe. So what? Russia wants some of this territory. Okay. Well, the issue, I suppose, for Europe, European Union, is gas prices. Americans, I don't think we have anything in this other than we want to support our European allies. But the problem is, how are you going to rally the support of the American population for your conflict in Eastern Europe when you won't even defend your southern border? With that being the case, I don't think Joe Biden's got any strong reason for why the U.S. should be sending troops to Eastern Europe at all, other than expanding some kind of Western, I don't know, elitist global plan or something like that. Look, while we criticize Joe Biden and Trudeau and the World Economic Forum, it sure is interesting. They're very concerned about Ukraine, and Joe Biden's not concerned about the United States. Perhaps the real issue is that Joe Biden is not allegiant. He does not care for the United States. He cares more for the international agenda, as it were. And the reason I say that is because I'm not saying that it's like that conspiracy, like any one of these conspiracy theories. I'm pointing out that Joe Biden cares more about what Europeans think of him and what he can offer them than his own borders. What are the trade agreements they have? What obligations do they have? And they would use American soldiers, young people from our country, to back up the agenda of Europe. It makes no sense. Sorry, it really doesn't. If you want it to make sense, you need to come out and you need to tell everybody exactly why you think it makes sense. Now, the big question here is whether or not we will see some kind of World War III because of some small and lowly regional conflict in Eastern Europe. And it sounds absurd, to be completely honest, to ask this question, but maybe there's a real issue here. The New York Times reports, and again, whether you trust the New York Times or not, take it with a grain of salt. Bond between China and Russia alarms U.S. and Europe amid Ukraine crisis. The Biden administration plans to build up global coalitions to counter a pact between Putin and Xi Jinping, portending a new type of Cold War. I think it's worse than that. I think it's absolutely worse than that. I think if the U.S. gets tangled up in an Eastern European conflict, China says, now's our chance. Taiwan is ours. And then everything just goes nuts. From foreignpolicy.com, Beijing could run Russia's playbook on Taiwan. The Ukraine crisis should refocus thinking on China's threats. Foreign Policy reports as Russia edges toward a full-scale invasion, U.S. thinking is understandably focused on Ukraine. But spare a thought for how Chinese President Xi Jinping might emulate his Russian counterpart's strategy. While there is much debate in Washington about a bolt-from-the-blue Chinese invasion of Taiwan, Beijing may instead generate a political military crisis by threatening to use force. If the U.S. wants to avoid being caught flat-footed, it needs to begin preparing today. Beijing's goal is to force Taiwan to meet its political demands, the acceptance of Chinese control over the island, while preventing the U.S. from standing in the way. While it could invade Taiwan to achieve this outcome, it does not necessarily need to do so. China might be satisfied with a Hong Kong-like outcome in which a more acquiescent government of Taipei takes over and makes concessions that strengthen Chinese control of the island. Indeed, the fact that China can invade and occupy Taiwan makes coercion combined with political machinations more likely. A scenario in which the Chinese Communist Party passes a law that spells out steps that Taiwan needs to take to unify and avoid war is not unimaginable. So let's break it down. Conflict is erupting in Ukraine. We have this story from WION News. Explosion reportedly hits Donetsk airport area. Kremlin says Biden-Putin summit is premature. We have this tweet from Max Sedan. Russia's army claims it destroyed 2 Ukrainian APCs it says crossed the Russian border, evacuating saboteurs from the battlefield, killing 5. What's significant aren't the claims, but that it's the Russian military, not separatists making them. And then Taiwan. The U.S. is getting entangled in a regional conflict when our real interests should be a Pacific conflict. Perhaps there's nothing we can do. Perhaps the U.S. is weak and spread too thin and will not be able to hold back a growing China. Well, there's war, baby. Certainly the U.S. can try. You know, I've long wondered about this with the Trump administration. I saw Donald Trump focusing on U.S. industry. I saw Donald Trump focusing on U.S. borders. I saw the economic collapse. And I thought to myself, as many others did, maybe Donald Trump sees the writing on the wall, that the U.S. empire is done. We couldn't stop the invasion of Crimea. We struggled with the Qatar-Turkey pipeline. We struggle in Afghanistan. And Trump said, none of this is working for us. The best bet is going to be a strategic U.S. imperial retreat. That is to say, the U.S. empire be damned. Shore up our borders, shore up our defense, make the United States strong, build up our factories, secure the American nation. Because if we try and keep our forces stretched out so thin around the world, they will falter and America will be crippled. We don't make our own medicine. Look at COVID. We don't make our own medicine. We don't make our own PPE gear. Our southern border is in shambles. Perhaps Donald Trump knew we were spread too thin around the world. He tried bringing our troops back from Afghanistan. He set the deadline. Biden botched it all. He tried bringing troops back from Syria. They wouldn't let him do it. Maybe Donald Trump was just a crackpot, crazy guy who was the avatar of the anger of the populist American movement. Or maybe he actually knew something that these people don't, or he was willing to admit something they won't. We cannot be the world's police. We cannot spread this thin. We will not conquer the planet. And it's time to bring it on home and just make Americans as comfortable and responsible and resilient as possible. I'm not saying that's true. I don't know for sure. I'm just saying maybe that was a big reason. Trump knew this was coming. He knew China was growing. He knew that we were playing into their growth. Joe Biden will go right back to the old playbook. Reuters reports UK sees threat to Taiwan if West does not support Ukraine. I highlight this story from only a few days ago from Reuters to show that the propaganda goes both ways. If you don't support Ukraine, then China will invade. No, sorry. It seems to me what makes the most sense is that the U.S. will be split too thin if we focus on Ukraine, and that's what's happening. Sending troops there. Express.co.uk reports World War III fears were sparked after Russia violated agreement, nuclear escalation risk. I'm sorry, this story is actually from today. The Express says a spokesman for Prime Minister Boris Johnson told a media briefing today that intelligence reports suggest Russian President Vladimir Putin intends to launch an invasion of Ukraine. The intelligence we are seeing suggests that Russia intends to launch an invasion and that President Putin's plan has already begun. We're seeing elements of the Russian playbook that we could expect to see in certain situations starting to play out in real time. Western leaders fear that Russia's military will move to Ukraine soon, having already engaged in military drills on its border with the country. It's not the first time, however, that Russia has been accused of ramping up tensions in Eastern Europe. This goes back to 2014 and in 2018, when Russian forces fired at and seized 3 Ukrainian naval vessels. So the article here is just a concern about what Russia will do. But we have this from the World Socialist website. This one I highlight to show you what the socialists are thinking. U.S. NATO escalate war threats against Russia. Are you ready for World War III? Now, perhaps this is another angle to the World War III line. Propaganda. The world socialists allowing the expansion of Russia? Maybe they're happy about some kind of Soviet expansion, Soviet-like expansion, and they're trying to scare you into denouncing this. Or maybe the reality is U.S. imperialism is a quote, U.S. imperialism is recklessly marching to the brink of World War III. I simply ask the World Socialist website, why do they not say such a thing with China and Taiwan? You know, I got to be honest. I don't disagree. I think U.S. imperialism is marching us towards World War III. It's one of the reasons I voted for Trump in 2020. Not because I think he's a great leader or anything like that, because I'm like, hey, I'll take it. It's better than empire. But, Trump was a fascist. Please. Trump wouldn't even deploy National Guard or military over the riots. But what about China? China is absolutely pushing imperialism, expanding in Africa, South America. It's been for a long time. And they are marching us equally towards World War III, which is why I genuinely believe there's a real prospect here of some kind of great global conflict. Nobody expects it. Let's talk about civil war for a second. Not to harp on this issue of civil war to deviate, but to point out, in the United States, no one thought it would happen. They said, no, none of the cannons will be loaded. No one will fight. There won't be state versus state. And then it happened. The story is that at Fort Sumter, when the Union troops were occupying the fort and the South said, get out, people set up on a hilltop picnicking, thinking it was funny. Nothing was going to happen. And then shelling happened. And even then, they didn't think anything would emerge from it, but it did. So when you see stories like this, people might say, no, there won't be a World War III. It won't. Nobody expects there to be because no one wants there to be. But what happens? China is already, they've been claiming Taiwan. I made videos about China and Taiwan, and I get these weird Chinese bot, accounts where they're like, Taiwan is not a country. It's part of China already. We can't invade our own country. And I'm like, yeah, okay. If anything, Taiwan is the real government of China. Because the story, basically, back when the communists were taking over, the actual government of China fled to Taiwan, where they've held up since then. That's why people jokingly refer to China as West Taiwan. But of course, the Chinese Communist Party has power, and they'll make their moves. From USA Today, who wins a Russian war against Ukraine? It could be China, Iran, and North Korea. Dictators in the rest of the world may see the opportunity for mischief if Russian troops invade Ukraine. Now, this gentleman for USA Today is not arguing, for the most part, World War III, but let's be real. If China takes Taiwan, if Iran expands their conflict, expands the conflict in the Middle East, you've got Yemen being backed by certain forces associated with Iran. You've got Saudi Arabia. You've got Middle Eastern conflict. You've got North Korea firing nukes. Everyone will seize upon the opportunity. Business Insider wrote this January 6th. 5 places where World War III could start in 2022. Now I just got to shout out Business Insider. Come on. This was an unwarranted article. Let's be real. It was unwarranted. We don't need back then to be talking about it, but you know what? I got to hand it to them. For being almost 2 months ago, they actually nailed it. They really did. 5 places. They showed this Taiwanese M110 self-propelled howitzers fire during exercises in South Taiwan, May 30th, 2019. They say, in the 5 places we have, first, Taiwan. Over the past year, long simmering U.S. concerns over the Chinese threat to military seem to have come to a boil. The potential for miscalculation is immense. The U.S. maintained a studied ambiguity towards Taiwan for the past 40 years, but it's escalating. Iran. Oh, I'm sorry. The first was actually Ukraine. I skipped over that one. The first was Ukraine, and the second was Taiwan, and that's the point. They nailed it. Ukrainian troops from Donbass Battalion train with small arms outside Mariupol, Ukraine. Easily the most likely flashpoint for great power war in 2022 lies along the border of Ukraine and Russia. Russia's immediate concerns involve the Ukrainian acquisition of Turkish drones along its border regions. Russia publicly argued it wants to resolve the issue of Ukraine and of Russia's relationship with NATO on a permanent basis. The U.S. and NATO have not responded positively to these overtures, but have notably failed to guarantee Ukraine's security. If Russia launches an invasion of Ukraine, things could get ugly quickly. Direct Russian military action would put immense pressure on the U.S. to respond in some fashion. However, the U.S. can support Kiev in several ways without direct intervention. So, okay. The question about all of this is whether or not, if Russia does send in the military into the eastern regions of Ukraine, will U.S. troops be involved? And the simple answer is maybe not. It would be too overt. But man, Russia's not this global power they used to be. The Soviet Union collapsed. China is more of a threat. But Russia is powerful, and they have nukes. And they've got military force. If they invade and the U.S. directly confronts them, that's where things go south. Because now it's Russia versus the U.S. But I want to point something out. I think the U.S. and the Ukraine will ultimately lose this conflict. The U.S. does not seem prepared for direct involvement, and Russia does. Putin knows this. He knows Biden is flailing. He knows the U.S. is weak. And it's unfortunate. It means that we won't be able to defend our allies. It means that we won't be able to use the fear, I suppose, of war. It's a scary thought that Russia can do whatever it wants, and those of us that oppose war wouldn't do anything in response. There needs to be some reasonable fear from countries like Russia and China that the U.S. will respond. But the only thing that's happened, especially over the Biden administration, the only message that's gone out is that we won't. We won't do anything. Oh, yeah, we got troops in Eastern Europe. But Vladimir Putin was able to take Crimea under the Obama administration. Nothing was done. I want to show you this tweet from David Rothkopf that I think is really important. He tweets, "If you have lived, as many of us have, through the Vietnam and oil wars and the debacles they became, and Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, it is easy to be skeptical of U.S. foreign policy. But now with Ukraine, the U.S. is on the side of peace, the rule of law, and defending the innocents." When I read that, I laughed a whole lot. This idea that now the U.S. is on the side of peace, spare me. But I want to point something out. I just take issue with this whole thing. Lived through Vietnam and the oil wars. Let me just point out, Vietnam was a debacle. Vietnam was wrong. Vietnam, man, we entered into Vietnam through a false flag attack, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. It's all BS. But we were the good guys in that circumstance. The communists were sweeping through Southeast Asia. The U.S. did a lot of bad things, but I tell you this, man, communism is not something we want to be able to tolerate in this world, and it's not an easy thing to oppose. And there's no easy answers as to how you oppose it. Perhaps we could have just sat back and said the U.S. should mind its own business. Let these countries deal with themselves. The problem is the Soviet Union wasn't. So what are the answers? I don't know. I don't like the idea of the U.S. going around world policing, but I actually fear the idea that we have an emergent communist faction with China, the Chinese Communist Party, expanding. And boy, are they. Yep. I think the U.S. is going to lose this one on the grand scale. Ultimately, I think the U.S. will be fine, though, but too much propaganda in the U.S. has subverted it. This idea that the U.S. is a multicultural democracy with at war with in a civil war with a constitutional republic just shows that the U.S. is being gutted from the inside. We've always been a constitutional republic. We've always been believing what we believe, but now multicultural democracy is something they espouse in big cities. It is not what this country is. And if there's a civil war, China just walks all over the rest of the world. I think we'll be fine. I genuinely do. I think those of you who care for the most part are responsible. You've been paying attention, watching this show. You know what's going to happen, and you've taken reasonable precautions for your life and the safety of your friends and family. I think people in the cities will suffer the most because they don't understand. This is really, really funny. I see these charts where they're like 70% of the U.S. GDP comes from blue areas, and I'm like, that's fantastic. That's really great for you guys. And where does the food come from? Because the food is not a big part of the country's GDP. So when y'all are making your Twitters and your Facebooks and your Ubers, and you got your fancy apps that make a lot of money for a lot of people, you're going to start asking where the food went. Because, you know, food's not the most expensive thing. That's why you got to understand it's not about GDP. It's about survivability. So I don't know what's going to happen with the global conflict, with U.S. regional conflict, with civil war. It just feels like we're at the end of the fourth turning. You know, Strauss-Howe generational theory. A lot of people don't like it, but I think the easiest way to explain it is that strong men make good times make weak men make hard times, and hard times make strong men. And we are in the weak men phase, entering the hard times phase. And then afterwards, after 2028 or so, things might become prosperous again. Or the U.S. could lose. We're on the verge of that 250 years. They say an empire only lasts that long. To be fair, the U.S. has not been an empire that long. So maybe it's unfair to bring up. But certainly something is happening. CBS News is reporting that Havana syndrome. Some believe it's a directed energy weapon attack. High-level national security officials stricken with unexplained illness on White House grounds. Some people report hearing humming, getting a headache, getting their vision blurred and light sensitivity. And it's called Havana syndrome. It's happening here in the US. It happened at the White House, in the security perimeter. Invisible directed energy weapons, possibly from small devices or vehicles that you can't track. And it causes low-tier damage, which negatively impacts you throughout the rest of your life. Happening here in the US at the White House under the Trump administration. I wonder by who? Why? The future of warfare is scary. With mass communications, you got to be careful about ending someone's life. Franz Ferdinand, for instance, right? World War I. But what if you can severely cripple an economy and an administration with special directed energy weapons that are undetectable? Well, there you go. Now you can cripple your enemy, so when you go to war, you've already won. That's the scary thought here. Who's doing it and why? What I can say is conflict seems to be on the horizon, no matter how you spin it. Either world war or civil war, street violence. Some people don't want to admit it. Because maybe it's not true. They all say, oh, we've been through stuff like this. No, you haven't. This is crazy. The level of conflict's been going on. There's been conflict, I know. But, I've looked at the data. I've talked to a lot of people. Based on the hard data alone, we're certainly on the verge of civil war. As for World War III, maybe it's just another conflict, but the ingredients all seem to be there. We'll see how it all plays out as per usual. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all then.